For the second step in Chew-Easy's production process, they are going to send those prepared peanuts off to the jarring department to be processed into finished cases of jars of peanut butter. So what cost would be unique to the jarring department that Chew-Easy would have to account for? Well, for direct materials, they would have the cost of the jars, the lids, the aluminum seal. For direct labor, they would have the labor cost, the wages of the workers who operate the machines, which pump the peanut butter into the jars to be finished. And then for manufacturing overhead, they would once again have the maintenance and depreciation on these machines. To prepare our PCR for the jarring department, we're going to need the same set of information we had in the peanut preparation department. We're going to need to know how many physical units we had in our beginning work in process, and then how many we started during July. And you'll notice here that the number of units which were started in July is exactly the same amount as the units which were transferred out of the prior phase of production. The peanut preparation department transferred out 40,000 cases worth of prepared peanuts, and then in the jarring department they ground them up and jarred them, or at least started to. So the amount of physical units which are transferred out of the first phase of production should always be equal to the amount of units which are transferred in to the second phase of production. And then hopefully some of those units which were transferred in got finished. They would be transferred out of the second phase of production. They would be jarred in our case, and they would be transferred to finished goods. For units which are not, we need to know how many units we have in ending WIP for the jarring department, how many batches of peanuts. Maybe they're ground up, they're not properly jarred yet, maybe they're not ground up yet at all. We don't know their level of completion, but we need to know how many units are in there. And then we would know how complete those cases worth of peanuts we have at the end are for their direct material costs that are going to be necessary to jar them, and their conversion costs. And then for the cost section of our PCR, we're going to need to know what amount of cost was transferred in to the jarring department from the peanut preparation department already for the units we had in beginning WIP, how much direct material cost exclusive to this jarring department was already incurred in units in beginning WIP before the month of July began, and the same thing, how much conversion cost was put into the batches of peanuts that came in from the peanut preparation department, which were sitting in beginning WIP in the jarring department when this month began. We need to know the amount of material costs which were added in the jarring department to product during the month of July, and what amount of conversion costs were added to product during the month of July. We have all that information so we can start working on the jarring department's PCR. And just like before, we are going to have the two sections. One is the physical unit section, which counts how many cases worth of peanuts, or when we finish them, cases worth of peanut butter, have flown through the jarring department during the period. And the second cost will be following the costs that have been incurred within the jarring department during the month of July. So we're going to start up here in the physical units section. We had 5,000 cases worth of peanuts, enough peanuts to make 5,000 cases worth of peanut butter in beginning WIP when the period began. And then the peanut preparation department transferred in to the jarring department 40,000 cases worth of properly prepared peanuts during the month, which means in all we have 45,000 cases worth of peanuts to be made in peanut butter that we need to figure out what portion of those ended up being finished, being made into jarred peanut butter, and what portion of those are still here in the jarring department waiting to be jarred that are our ending WIP. Well, we know from our information over here that 38,000 finished cases of peanut butter were transferred out of the jarring department to finished goods during the month of July. If we had 45,000 cases that we have to account for, and we know that we finished and transferred out 38,000 finished cases, that means the other remaining 7,000 cases have to be in our ending WIP. And that would lead us to accounting for all 45,000 cases worth of peanut butter that we need to on this PCR. For transferred in, we need to figure out what amount of units we're going to have accounted for. Well, this part is really simple to start with. All of those units that came into the jarring department during the period, whether we finish them, whether they're sitting in our ending WIP, whatever, it doesn't matter. They have to be complete for all of the costs that would have been incurred in the previous department. Any batch of peanuts that's in the jarring department, either finished being jarred or waiting to be jarred, still has to be shelled, roasted, salted, all of the things that happen during the peanut preparation process. Your transferred in equivalent units will always be exactly the same as your physical units, because if they were not complete for all the costs that they needed to be, or all of the steps in production that they needed to be in the previous departments, they would have not made it to this phase of production, to the jarring department. For direct materials, again, we would not have transferred out cases of peanut butter to finished goods had they not been complete for all of the direct material costs, jars, lids, seals, etc., that are necessary to make a finished case of peanut butter within this department. So your equivalent units for everything that's completed and transferred out should also always be the same as your physical units. Ending WIP might be different though. Our ending WIP for direct materials is denoted in our information that it has had 0 direct material costs put into it. Again, equivalent units means how many cases could we have finished in full for the same costs that we paid to partially complete a certain amount of cases. In this case, if we put 0 direct material cost into these jars of peanut butter that are an ending WIP, we can't have equivalent units. I mean, how many cases can you finish for 0 money? And that's 0. So if you have a 0%, your equivalent units has to be 0. In this case, our total equivalent units of production for direct materials within the jarring department is just going to be 38,000. How about for conversion costs? Again, we would not have transferred out finished jars of peanut butter from the jarring department to finished goods if they were not complete for all of the conversion costs necessary to jar that peanut butter, the cost to pay our laborers to run those machines, etc. So all our jars that have been transferred out have to be complete for conversion costs. Again, anything that's completed and transferred out should always be the same number that you had for physical units. What about those 7,000 jars worth or cases worth of peanut butter jars that we have in our ending WIP? Well, our information tells us they're 30% complete for conversion costs. So how many cases of peanut butter could we have finished in full all the way for the same amount of conversion costs that it took us to finish 7,000 cases 30% of the way? And if we multiply that out, it's 2,100. Because 7,000 times 30% gives us that 2,100. So in total, the units that we accounted for conversion costs, or our equivalent units of production for conversion costs, is 40,100. We spent enough on conversion costs within the jarring department to fully complete 40,100 cases worth of peanut butter. We didn't fully complete 40,100 cases worth of peanut butter. We only completed 38,000, and we partially completed 7,000, but for that total cost, we could have completed 40,100 cases worth of peanut butter in full, at least in regards to our conversion costs. And now that we are through the physical units section, we can go down to the cost section. Starting with transferred in, we have our beginning WIP. And our beginning WIP, it tells us in our information right over here that the units that we had in beginning WIP in the jarring department in the month of July, when July began, already had $22,000 worth of costs transferred into them from the peanut preparation department. And then how much cost was added from transferred in from the departments that came before us in the production process. And that's going to be $176,000. Where did that number come from? I don't see that in the information on the left-hand side. If you go back to the previous section of this PCR, you're going to see that is the same amount of cost which was transferred out from the peanut preparation department. So whatever your costs added during the period is for the transfer in section of each subsequent department, it has to be equal to the costs which were transferred out of the department before. We're just flowing costs through each step. So since this is the second step, your transferred in costs added during the period are going to be equal to your transferred out costs from the first step. If we add those two together, we come up with $198,000. We're going to divide that by our equivalent units of production, which we just saw in the unit section was 45,000. So 198,000 divided by 45,000 is $4.40. Every jar of peanut butter that has come through the jarring department, or every case of peanut butter that's come through the jarring department, has about $4.40 worth of costs which were incurred in the phase of production before it even got to the jarring department. That is our cost per equivalent unit. How about for direct materials? Our information tells us over here that in beginning WIP, we hadn't put any direct material costs exclusive to the jarring department into those units before the period began. During the period, we added $19,000 worth of direct material costs. We used $19,000 worth of jars, lids, seals, etc., which means we have $19,000 worth of direct material costs exclusive to the jarring department, which we need to account for. Well, what was our equivalent units of production for direct materials? It was 38,000. So if we spent $19,000 and that was enough to fully complete 38,000 cases worth of peanut butter, how much are we paying in direct material costs for the stuff that's exclusive to the jarring department per each case of peanut butter that we make? And the answer to that is 50 cents, 19,000 divided by 38,000. For conversion costs, our beginning work in process already had $1,200 worth of conversion costs committed to it. What did we add during the period? Our information tells us that we spent $3,840 on labor within this department. We allocated $11,000 of manufacturing overhead. Our total conversion costs, which we added during the month, was $14,840. So if the jars that were, or the cases that were in the jarring department when the period began already had $1,200 worth of costs committed to them, and we spent another $14,840 in conversion costs converting those prepared peanuts into cases of finished peanut butter, that means that we have a total of $16,040 worth of conversion costs to account for. How many equivalent units did we have for conversion costs? We had 40,100. We had 38,000 completely finished units. We had 7,000 units, which were 30% done for conversion costs, which means that in total, for that same amount of cost that we paid to fully complete 38,000 and complete another 7,000, 30% of the way, we could have fully completed 40,100 jars of peanut butter. And if it takes $16,040 to fully complete 40,100 cases worth of peanut butter, that means that each case of peanut butter that is jarred in the jarring department causes us to incur about 40 cents worth of conversion costs. And then we got to figure out our total costs, which we're just summing up the rows going across. For beginning WIP, our beginning WIP had a total of $23,200 worth of costs already contained in it when the period began. During the period, $176,000 worth of costs was transferred in from the peanut preparation department, and then the jarring department ended up paying $19,000 for direct materials and $14,840 for conversion costs for labor and overhead. That totals up to $209,840 worth of costs, which were added to product during the period. So our total cost to account for is the sum of the $198,000 worth of transferred in costs, the $19,000 worth of direct materials, and the $16,040 worth of conversion costs. That adds up to $233,040, which is also nicely the beginning WIP plus the cost added during the period. So this number right here is equal to the row next to it and the column above it. Now we have to figure out from that $233,040 how much of that needs to be transferred out to finished goods and how much of that's going to stay within the jarring department as ending WIP for this department. Well, let's start over here. Completed and transferred out. For our equivalent units of production for completed was 38,000. We transferred out 38,000 units. Obviously, we would not have transferred them out from the jarring department to finished goods if they were not complete for all of the costs from the peanut preparation, which they transferred in to us. And our cost per EUP, per equivalent unit of production, for transferred in is $4.40, which means those 38,000 cases of peanut butter, which were transferred out to finished goods, costing $4.40 that was transferred into us from the peanut preparation department, means that $167,200 worth of transferred in costs now needs to be transferred out to finished goods. What about the units which are in ending WIP? Well, we've got 7,000 units in ending WIP. Our cost per equivalent unit for transferred in is still $4.40, which means our ending WIP within this department, the 7,000 cases worth of peanut butter we're still working on, is containing $30,800 worth of transferred in costs, which came to us from the peanut preparation department. And in total, that is going to be $198,000 worth of transferred in costs that we have accounted for during the period, which is equal to our cost to account for that particular cost component. So we're matching up there. For direct materials, we transferred out 38,000 completed cases. For each of those, we spent, according to our information, 50 cents to finish any one unit. That's our cost per equivalent unit, any one case of peanut butter. So if we transferred out 38,000 cases and each one cost us 50 cents in direct material costs from the jarring department, it means $19,000 worth of material costs from the jarring department needs to be transferred out of this department and into finished goods. What about our ending WIP for direct materials? Well, our equivalent units of production for ending WIP was 0 for direct materials. So even though that's 50 cents a case, that means that we have $0 of direct materials costs committed to cases of peanut butter, which we have not finished when the month of July ends. And in total, we got to account for that $19,000. Next up, we've got our conversion costs. Again, we completed and transferred out 38,000 cases. Our information tells us the cost per equivalent unit is 40 cents. Every case of peanut butter that we finish costs about 40 cents in conversion costs unique to the jarring department to run through the machines and to jar into peanut butter, which means that we spent $15,200 in conversion costs to complete those 38,000 cases, and that $15,200 now needs to be transferred out of the jarring department to finished goods. Well, we've got 7,000 units in ending WIP, and those 7,000 units in ending WIP are 30% done, which means, one more time, for the cost to finish 7,000 units, 30% of the way, we could have completed 2,100 units all the way. We have 2,100 equivalent units of production in ending WIP. And to finish a case of peanut butter, it costs about 40 cents in conversion costs unique to this department. So those 2,100 equivalent units at 40 cents a piece has $840 for the conversion costs that we incurred committed to units which are an ending WIP within the jar department. Our ending WIP cost for conversion cost should be $840, and that totals up to $16,040, which again is the same amount of cost that we needed to account for that particular cost component. So how much in total should be transferred out of the jarring department and into finished goods? The $167,200 worth of transferred in cost, the $19,000 worth of material costs, and the $15,200 worth of conversion costs. That adds up to $201,400. In our ending WIP, the units that we have in the jarring department, which are not finished when the period ends, which are going to contribute to the ending WIP we report on our balance sheet, mumbling over here. We have 30,800 units and $30,800 worth of transferred in costs contained in the units which are in ending WIP, and another $840 of conversion costs in those same units. That is a total of $31,640 worth of cost, which has already been committed to jars of peanut butter, which we have not finished producing and transferred to finished goods inventory when this month of July ends. And if we take $201,400 and add to it $31,640, we come up with $233,040, which is also the sum of $198,000 plus $19,000 plus $16,040, and it is also equal to the total cost that we had to account for. So now we figured out where all those costs that were in the jarring department ended up when the period began. Those $233,040 that we had to account for, $201,400 of it needs to be transferred out to finished goods inventory, and the other $31,640 is still hanging out in the ending WIP for the units which are not yet completed within the jarring department.